The three major principles, ideas, and crises currently ravaging the West, in my opinion, are mass migration / demographic change, neoconservatism / neoliberalism, and globalism. First, I'm going to discuss mass migration and demographic change. I would like to note that each of these three topics will get their own separate video later, but at the moment I'm going to briefly touch on all three in order to effectively just express my general views about things. So on mass migration and demographic change, two perfect examples of how demographic change can change an area or a country and how culture is merely downstream from demographics is in Lebanon. The country was originally a majority Christian country which had high social and human rights. For instance, the citizens had rights to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and so on. However, Lebanon is now facing a point where the Muslim population has outgrown the Christian population. And so now the Muslims are taking control of the government, and thus you're now seeing a drift towards the squashing of these former rights. Now you're going to see Lebanon slowly turn into probably a new Iran or Saudi Arabia. More likely Saudi Arabia because there's Sunni Muslims mostly in Lebanon, with Hezbollah operating there in an attempt to make it a Shia caliphate. Now, California, as an example, is for a long time was a Republican stronghold. However, after the Immigration Act of 1963 was passed, a whole lot of Hispanics started moving into California and having far more kids than the white population. White population birth rates were going down while the Hispanic rates were just going up. And then the country, or the state, eventually hit the point where it had more than 50% minorities, and whites were now lower than the total amount of minorities. And now California is a stronghold blue state. And these are just basic examples. Like, this isn't going into the larger impact that demographic change can have on a country. Lebanon is my one example of that I've been showing. Anyways, on to neoconservatism and neoliberalism, or as I call it, Trotskyism 2.0. In my view, the two ideologies that are the main reason for the U.S.'s fucked up foreign policy and our fucked up culture and everything is neoconservatism and neoliberalism, because we are effectively now what the USSR would have been if Trotsky had won and had taken charge over Lenin and Stalin. But instead of forcing communism on other countries and staging communist coups, we're instead forcing democracy and freedom upon these other countries. Numerous examples of this exist. Iraq, Libya, Chile, Brazil, many others, ever since the Cold War, really. And during the Cold War, there was a reason for it to exist, because it was to combat the USSR, who was doing the exact same thing. And if we didn't force democracy, they were going to force communism. Anyways, the neoconservatism has led to us being pulled into stupid wars where thousands of young Americans die and billions of dollars are spent and no progress is really made. Look at Iraq. What did we achieve out of that? We achieved a destabilized country that is in a state of civil war and could be taken over by a radical Islamist. Libya is the same way, except they're even more fucked in their civil war. They got more sides. And the last one is globalism, which the three faces, I'd argue, of globalism are Israel, the EU, and George Soros. You could argue a fourth is NATO, but the three major ones I feel are Israel, the EU, and George Soros. Globalism and its teachings have been what have created the death of nationalism in the millennial generation. Because even though the boomers had a pretty bad version of nationalism, boomer nationalism, it was at least some sort of pride in the country, which is important if you want to keep your country around. Because if you don't have pride in your country's gonna fucking die. And it also led to the modernization of Trotskyite philosophies, such as the idea that we should all become one country. Look, that's what the EU is. The EU wants to nationalize and create one giant European country. And that is a Trotskyite philosophy. Like, that is directly based off of that. Now, George Soros' position in all this is his colleges he has throughout the Western world that basically indoctrinate people into this modern-day Trotskyite philosophy, and creates, what we call SJWs, creates pseudo-communists such as, Antifa and such, and because they become indoctrinated, and one of the key ways that they do it is they say that, if we all become one, then there won't be any conflict, there won't be any war. Well, that's just as flawed of an argument as anarcho-capitalism, where it goes, if we all just are individuals, then there will be no conflict. It's not logical. It makes no sense. And globalism is also leading to nihilism, which leads to people, just not wanting to fight for anything. No one wants to die for anything nowadays. People don't feel enough connection to their country, to their government, to be willing to go out and die for it. Unlike, say, 100 years ago, or really any time before World War II, people were willing to go out and fight and die for their country and their people. But now that we have a world that is ruled by globalism and by leftism, that nationalistic pride and willingness to voluntarily go out and die for our country is gone. And it's depressing. And final statement, I hope that this wasn't too rambling. I was kind of just unloading in this video in order to prepare the topics that I'll be going over in my next videos. This one will probably be less polished and less edited than the other ones. I'll really just cut out my ums and any heavy breathing or anything like that. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you stay after my first video.